Hello everyone, welcome to .NET Stack Training. We are having a demo today on repository design pattern. So we are going to deeply look into what exactly repository design pattern means and how we can use in our day-to-day application development, and what are the advantages of using repository design pattern over the usual way of using CRUD operations. We are also going to look into dependency injection, and we are going to use it in order to have an extra hand for the design for this design pattern. And we're also going to use .NET Core. So before moving into the objective of this demo, I would just like to introduce myself. I am Mohammad Farooq. I'm a solution architect and a trainer having 10 plus years of experience in different domains: healthcare, education, taxation, shipping, especially cruise lines. Also, I have a deep experience in training and skill development of for .NET Stack. Below mentioned is my LinkedIn profile. You can just check it out. Without further ado, let's start with the demo. So before moving on to all the core stuff, I just wanted to make sure that you guys have a prerequisite, that is object-oriented concept, C# programming language, and a basic knowledge of entity framework and database first approach. If you guys don't have this knowledge, then you should first check out these three topics first, then you should check this repository design pattern demo. So our objective today is to understand what exactly repository design pattern means and what are the advantages of using design pattern over the usual way of using CRUD operations. When I say CRUD operation means create, update, retrieve, and delete operations that are going to be performed on the database. Also, we are going to check out the code, how to implement repository design pattern and use it efficiently in the application. Also, we are going to see the best practices which needs to be or which would be the standard procedures for implementation and use of repository design pattern. And there we are going to discuss whether to use and how to use it. That would be our conclusion. So without further ado, let's move to understand what's a usual way, or what is the standard way what people usually use to perform CRUD operations. So if you can see that I have in the right side, I have mentioned the layers DAL, BL, and UI. When I say DAL, it's a data access layer where all our logic of code access would be there. I mean, all the code required to perform database operations like writing on the database, reading from the database, updating a particular record, deleting a record, or batch update or batch delete or batch insert. All those database related logic would be written at data access layer, and all your business logic will reside in BL layer, that is business layer. Here usually we write different business logic like some calculation and some processes, after which we are going to perform the CRUD operations. So BAL or BL would require some operations to be written on the database after all the calculations. So that is why you can see the data access layer is on top and giving all its features to the business access layer, and thereby business access layer would use those operations to perform all the CRUD. Then there is a UI layer where all our UI side, client side application would reside. Let's say, for example, a web API or a MVC web application or any other web application or a desktop application or a console application or any library that is required to show user and user can interact. So the UI layer would use the business access layer to perform their operations. Let's say, for example, you've got a login page. You're going to insert username and password, and you are going to call a login method from business access layer, wherein you are going to pass all username and password, and business access layer would perform few logics of encryption or decryption of the password, and then call a data access layer to read that particular user from the database, and then if it is available, it will supply the proper results to the UI layer. So this is about the structure, what usually is followed. And at the right side, you can see that the user are invoking a BL layer request for the operation. That operation could be anything. And the business layer then, or the business logic, as you can see here, is invoking the CRUD operations. And here there can be number of different things like create, update, retrieve, delete, or some calling of stored procedures, and all those methods would be written for that specific business operation, and then the read write operation would be performed on the database. So this is the usual way, or that people usually use, or the developer usually use. Then we've got a repository pattern in which so for all the business logic, would be so I have mentioned a few business logic. Let's say, for example, there is an employee which can perform, or there is a business logic for employee wherein we can check how many employees we have. We can also check what is the department information of the employee, and for those things we need to go to the database and grab that information and bring it to business access layer. So for each of the class, in a usual way, we have to write, let's say for example there is an employee, so we have to write all the CRUD operation in business layer for employee. Then if there is any product information or a product related information in our system, then we have to create a product class, and we have to write all the product related CRUD operations here in business layer, and we have to call the database. So similarly for order and catalogs, and there can be n number of classes that would require some CRUD operations, and we have to write different CRUD operations every time for each of them, like inserting a product, creating a product, deleting a product. So we have to write one set of operations for product. Then again, if you have order class, then you have to write again different set of CRUD operations for the order class in a usual way. But here in design, repository design pattern, you don't have to write multiple times this CRUD operation. You have to write it only once, which is implemented here in a generic class. So basically, what is a generic class? You can check out in C# programming language course. So this generic class will give us extra hand not to repeat this task of CRUD operation for that particular table or entity when we are talking about entity framework. So let's check out the code first, like how we are going to implement a repository design pattern. And first we are going to see the usual way of having, or how the repository, or how the usual way works, and then we are going to check out how repository design pattern would work. So I have already created a demo solution, which is a demo repo, and I'll quickly walk you through the setup of my solution. So the first one is the application layer, and I would say this is the layer where our business logic would reside. Then we've got an infrastructure layer, wherein all our database related operations would reside here, and I would say it as domain access layer, or DAL, data access layer. Then we've got our domain here. So as I said that we are going to use entity framework. So entity framework has models like all the tables which are there in the database. So I've got two tables in my database. This is a sample. These are sample tables for this demo. So we've got a basic info table which has first name, last name, age, and gender. And then this basic information has some contact details. So I've got a primary key coming from basic info table that would tell this mobile number is for this particular record. So these two tables would come as a class with the help of entity framework into our project. So those entity model classes would reside in this domain layer. Then we've got an IOC layer. This is for cross-cutting concern, meaning that all dependency injection logic would be written over here, and I would use this to inject it to our presentation layers or any other layer like application layer. So the dependencies of these layers are like domain will not depend on anyone. From here, the infrastructure is going to use the models. So infrastructure would depend on domain layer. There would be interfaces that we are going to use, which would reside in domain, and those are going to be used by application layer. And then application layer is used by the presentation layer. Presentation layer also use the IOC layer because here all the dependency injection logic would be written usually. So IOC would have a reference of domain layer and infrastructure layer. So in these layers, if you see that I have different set of library projects, these all are library projects of .NET 5, and I have nothing much in it. I've just created and I have given them specific names so that it is very clear in which namespace we are working. And then in presentation layer, we've got a web API which will interact or which can be exposed to your web applications or any mobile applications for any mobile applications. So what we would do first thing is to bring in these database related information using entity framework in our project. To do that, here on infrastructure project, so infrastructure layer, as I said, that it would just work like data access layer. Also, when we can use this infrastructure layer to have all the operations which would help us out in terms of connecting with external web APIs or some external communication to, let's say, for example, you need to send an email, you can write that logic over here. If you want to send an SMS, you can write that logic here. Or if there are any third parties web APIs, let's say some geolocation web APIs are there, which will help you out to get some geolocation address or mapping into a map, you can also write it over here. So this is all external things that needs to be the logic for all those external type of things. You can write it on the infrastructure layer. So what I would do is I would right click on this, and I have got a very good tool, this which is called EF Core Power Tools, as we are using entity core framework. So I would click on it, and it will ask me which database I want to connect. So I would like to connect to a database which is available over here. So I just need to grab my connection string. So there's my connection string. I would grab it over here, and I would select my database, which is RepoDB. Test the connection, it has succeeded, and I would click OK. Now it will okay. Okay, I already have, I think. Okay. So now we would scaffold our database to the infrastructure project. So it is asking me which tables you want. So I want all the tables. So I would click OK. And now it will ask me to where to put things. For example, this database, I will just connect it. So these tables, I mean, these would come as a classes, as I said before. So these I want it in my domain. Okay, so the necessity of putting it in domain is that uh, this can be shared across all the places, because this is not dependent on anyone, so that we can have proper test on each layer. So what I would do is, here it is saying where you want to keep it. So I don't have, as of now, I don't have any model classes. So for this, I need to first create a model folder over here in this project. So I would just right click, add a folder, models. Okay, I think it is already there. So I would just go to that place and remove it. Yeah, so models is already there, so I just need to remove it. And I would remove this, or I don't need to, and I would keep it open just for the sake, and I would just rename this to models. Okay, and as you know, that entity framework has a database context. So I would create one more folder for context. Okay, it also says that it is there, so we will just go here and we will go to infrastructure and we will delete this folder as well. In your case, it won't be there. So I've got a context folder here ready with me. Now I would right click on the infrastructure project, go to my EF Core Power Tools and go to reverse engineering, and I would select RepoDB. I would select OK. You can get the Entity Framework Core Power Tools from the internet. It's easily available. So now here I need to, so what I would do is I would keep the namespace as demo repo. And here I need a path for this particular folder. So what I would do is I'll just grab it from here. So I'll go over here. I would go to domain. I would go to models and I would click here. I would copy this path and I would paste it over here. Now it is saying the entity types namespace, that is all the classes which are going to come over here from the database, I mean the tables, we need to give it a proper namespace. So what I'll do is I will copy this, I will paste it over here. I will write it's having domain dot models, right? Because this is a folder. So what is a namespace? You can get it in object-oriented programming language concepts. I mean, that is a prerequisite for this. Then again, we need a DB context path where my context would reside. So what I would do is I would go to my infrastructure project and I would grab this path. Okay, and then again, same thing. I need to grab this, paste it over here. Instead of that, I need demo repo infrastructure, right? Same name is correct. Infrastructure. You need to make sure that these names are proper, because otherwise the references would not work. So I'm saying install all the required packages to the project, include connection string in the generated code. This is not the best way to do it, but for now, for this demo sake, I'm keeping it. We usually keep it outside, I mean not in the code. And then I would say use the table name and column names directly from the database itself. The moment I add this RepoDB context, I would just need it as, let's say, repo context maybe. Okay, I'll click OK and it will automatically generates all the database related entity framework code for me. So as you can see that it has generated all the codes and namespaces properly here. Those two tables came. Okay, and it has also created um, the references as well from the table. If you guys don't know what exactly how entity framework works, you just need to first check it out. So, oh, it came double. It should be only one. So I think I might have missed it, and I need to check out these guys as well. Yeah, it came double because I have not removed it from there at the time of scaffold. So you can oops. And why is this? Okay, let's check it out. So this should have a reference to the project repo domain, right? Domain. So let's see if we are having it or not. So going to project references, and here you can see that domain is not selected. That's why it is saying that you are not having that thing, that reference issue. So if we click on this one, if we click here, it basically works, right? And as you can see here, the connection string is there for my database. And here, everything required for my database to be configured. This you can check out in Entity Framework course. Now our database context is set and tables are set. I can now perform the database operations or the operations that are required. So first we'll see what is a usual way. In a usual way, imagine, let's say we have a folder, we'll arrange it in a manner that we've got basic info logic. Okay, here I would add my class, let's say basic info prod. Okay, I will make it public. Okay, now if I want to use all the CRUD, or I can also show you it right away over here instead of doing all that. So imagine, so this basic CRUD info operations can be very tiring because in our setup we are not directly interacting with infrastructure layer as we have seen here, because business layer is accessing data access layer directly, but in our case it is all decoupled. It will never use infrastructure, so that we can independently check this layer out, right? So to do that what we can do is, just give me a second, I will just yeah. So to do that, what I will do is to mock this layer. What I would do is I would create a class over here. I just wanted to show you how it will work. So basic info logic. Imagine this is a business access layer, and I would add a class. Let's say basic info prod. Okay, this is a public class, and here let's say we have a constructor, private read only. I need my database context here, this one, this guy over here, to perform all the database related operations. This is okay, this is the one. Here I would just write, and I would add a reference to it, and I would say db context maybe, and then I would do db context equals to new db context, right? And then I have public, let's say what we'll do, we'll insert, so insert record, and let's say uh, basic info. We will pass the details. We'll write entity here. So this is the table that we need to pass it to this insert record. And as entity framework works, you just put add and you write entity. I'm not writing any logic or any null checks just to speed up the process. Save changes. Okay. So this is inserting a record. Similarly, I can copy and I can do update, right? And you can have update. You can have similarly like delete, and you can have delete over here. I guess remove is there. Yeah. So you've got, and if you want to select, let's say, a specific record and you need to return it, so you can also do that. Basic info get by id, an integer id you are passing, which is a primary key to this table, and you can do db context dot find. In that you need to send id I oh, my bad, id. What is that? Here basic info, and here you will pass the id and var record. You can mention it like this, and probably you can return it, or rather you can directly do it here, right? Okay, so this is you have done for basic info. If you want to do it for, we've got another table, right? We've got contacts. So to do that, we need to write one more here, class, let's say contact crud, and then repeat our all operations. So I can simply, for the time's sake, I can copy it from here, everything, and just replace the class name and all. So here instead of basic, so I can do this, I can copy this dude from here, and instead of this it is basically I first need to have this model, and then contacts like this, and probably I can right. So this is a usual way wherein we have for each of them we are repeating this task. So the tasks repeated are basically these, right? These tasks. So we need to find a way not to repeat this, but it should perform proper operations to the particular classes, so that we don't end up writing all this. And in business layer, only if this is required, we can directly call it via our generic pattern. So this is what the usual way is, which will reside, this logic would completely reside in application layer, or I would say business access layer. But since in our setup there is no business layer, this is acting like a business layer, but it will never interact with the infrastructure layer. It will interact with domain layer. So we will check out in a moment like how that can be achieved. And basically this setup is called a clean architecture. In this, every layer is independently testable, which is very much easy and effective. So in order to avoid such situations, we need to write CRUD operations, a generic way of writing this CRUD operations. To do that, so for now, as you have understood, like how business layer logic would usually work. So for all of these 4 classes, and there can be a number of classes, you have to repeat this task again and again. So to avoid that situation, we are going to introduce the repository pattern. So for now, I would just remove this from here. Okay, and we would check it out if it is there or not. Let's go to infrastructure project. Okay, that layer is not there no more. Okay, so now how to achieve repository pattern in our system. So the very first thing that we would do is introduce a folder over here, and we would call it as, oops, my bad, not here, but in the project. Now here I would add new folder, and I would say interfaces. Okay, and here one more folder I would add in infrastructure layer. I would, for your simplicity, I would tell it as DB services. Okay, here I would add an interface, and I would say iRepository, or to be very frank, I would say, yeah, okay, let's keep it as iRepository. I was about to rename it as iGeneric repository. And when we say generic, means where T is class, meaning whenever we are going to use this repository pattern, it would be generic, and any kind of classes we can provide over here. When I say classes, that means these classes. And here we would have a void, let's say insert record, and here T I would write entity, right? And I would just copy it, update, and I would say delete, update, delete record, and let's say T get by ID, and here integer ID. Okay, as simple as that. So these were the operations which were which were getting repeated. Now here in DB services, I would add a class, and I would say repository. Now it's not an interface, it's a class where our repository would be implemented. Okay, and this would also be a generic one, T, where T is class, and I would click here, add the reference, and then implement those things, implement interface. Right, so right now there is no implementation written over here. We will just do it in a bit. Now first thing is to add a constructor. This is a shortcut I use, and here we need to have this context, our DB context over here, right? I mean this one, to use all the operations. So what we'll do is we'll write private read only this DB context. Let me add the reference, and then we just write DB context. Okay, and we would pass this DB context to the constructor and read it from the constructor. Basically, we would do this dot underscore DB context equals to DB context, meaning our this private one would be initialized with this one, and I would tell you how we are going to pass it. Okay, now here I can do underscore DB context dot, it's removed, right? It's as it is delayed. I would do entity, and I would say let's dot save changes, right? And similarly, I can just copy it for saving my time, and here I would say add, and here I would say update, and here it would be a little bit different. So we would write return underscore DB context dot find, and we would tell T, and we would send ID. That's it. Okay, So this is the implementation of our generic repository pattern. So this task, which is a repeated task, I don't need to write it again and again by for these two classes, but how to use them. So I'll just show it to you in a bit, but how this would be coming over here. Okay, so we can either directly send it, but we are going to use dependency injection. So let's quickly look into dependency injection. So what I'll do is I will use .NET Core features for this one. So now what I will do is I would add, let's say, a class, and I would say dependency container. This would be a public static class, and I would, oops, my bad, it should be here. Now, here I would have a public static register void, a method which I would say register services, where I would have the Microsoft extension methods. Like I need to add them first to use it, which will help me out for injecting my stuff, or all the like the interface and in the application that we just created. And if I want to um, register my DB, okay, so my DB would be used as this DB context would be a singleton that I would define it over here itself. So what I would do is I would first install the required packages. So Microsoft extension configuration, yeah, and abstraction as well. And we can also, I would show you one more way. So let's say I would do this iService connection, which is not there in the application, but it will tell like which package you want to install. So you can click over here, find and install, and it will install it in your project. So basically this will help us in terms of dependency injection from .NET Core. So here I would say services, and here iConfiguration would use that package, and I would say configuration. This would be required if you are keeping your connection string or any other things outside, but since we are using it inside our project, we can directly use it. So now, but for understanding repository pattern, you don't need all this. I mean, the way you want to use it, we can still use it since interface is inherited. So let's say business logic, here you want to use CURD basic info. So here what you can do is you can have private read only. Where is that? iRepository, right? This you will copy, and you would say iRepository, whose reference is not there. And okay, so our this project need to have a reference for domain. As I said, domain is not dependent on anyone, but others are, right? So what I'll do is, oops, I'll get rid of this. Now we can have the reference, and this would become as basic info, right? Which is again in domain models. So this particular class can be independently tested because I'm only using interface. So I would just write repo. Again, we have a constructor. I would just copy this again. Okay, and I would just remove this and I would say this dot repo equals repo, and this would be injected here. Okay, injection we'll see in a bit. Now, now you are exposing. Now, you don't need to write multiple code operations for this one again and again. I mean, you can directly use it. Let's say there is some logic, public void perform logic. Here there is some logic. There is some calculation going on or process, and then you need to use you need to save that prepared data here. We'll just go like repo dot add, it is insert record, and you would see now in place of in this place of t, since it is generic, it is coming now that class, right, this one. So it will understand this insert record in the interface. It will understand that I have to perform operations on this particular table. So I need to pass that information. So I don't have this, so I'll just create, let's say we created basic info information. Let's say info, we have created this information and we are sending it. Okay, so just writing this will insert the record, and you can use it anywhere again and again. So those repeated lines, these lines, you don't have to again and again do it. This can be so there are a lot of other things that we need to uh, take a note of it, but which is not a target for this demo today. We're just targeting how a repository design pattern is implemented. Okay, so this is the logic that you need, but how to inject these guys over here? So what we usually do is here we say services, services dot add transient. I have to specify the class. So basically this project should have a reference of add project reference. I should have domain and in infrastructure both. Okay, and here I would say and I need to add the references. So iRepository, this one, interface, right? And then what we have, so now because this is a type, so I just need to specify type of, because it's a generic one, type of, and you will say this type, you need to map it to, what? You need to map it to DB services, this repository.cs. So it should be a bracket, repository. So it is under DB services. So here also it's a generic one, so I need to say type of, and you put it over here. Great. And this should be like this. Also, you can add services dot add DB context for repo context. If you don't want to keep your connection string, then here options, use SQL, or I would say, I think repo, yeah. Oh, use SQL. We need to, I think I missed something. Options, we can have options dot use SQL. Yeah, there is, we have not installed. So when here you get connection string. Yeah, this one. This reference we need to have, and then you can have configuration. You can pick it up from there. I mean, configuration dot get connection string, and here you can have that connection string which is there in our uh, context, this one. So you don't need to keep it over here. Then you can completely comment out this line and use it out here. So now that would not be there, but this should come from your presentation layer. Okay, it should come from this app setting.json. Here you need to have connection string, like connection string. Here you need to have what I have used it over there is, no, not like this, but dbcon, let's say, and this dbcon, I would say dbcon, and here that path will go. So that path will come from here. So this you don't need to have it here. You can at any point change this target, right? So that if you put it in code, you have to redeploy the code. But in this way, you don't need to. You just need to update this connection string and it will work. Now, this is okay. This is okay. Now, it will read it from here and it will register and it will inject. These two lines would inject the respective thing. This would inject repository context over here, and this will inject this iRepository to this constructor. You don't need to bother about it. Okay, you can also, instead of this, you can have an interface here also to decouple things if you want to, but that is not the target today. So now what we are going to do is we are going to put the same thing in our app setting development one as well. Okay, so that everything works properly, and this should be your starter project. Okay, now what you can do is, so we have all the setup ready. We just need to inject in your application, like this application. So to do that, we need to go to startup, and here we need to have a reference of IOC container and application layer, as previously I have explained. So we've got IOC and application layer. That's it. And then we can have using demo repo.ioc, right? And here we are registering our services. As you can see that we have created an extension method over here. Not here. This is our extension method as we have applied this. So what we can do is we can do services dot register services in bracket will pass configuration. Okay, this configuration is already there and injected, and it is done by .NET Core itself, so you don't need to really worry about it. So this will register all my dependencies that I want to be injected, and I don't want to initialize them and so on. Okay, so now in your application you have a controller. Let's say I will add one more. Let's say API controller. Let's say add basic info controller. Okay, so this is the path. Here now I would do CTOR again, and I don't need to basically read only. This is what we want to implement, right? This one. So I'll just copy this, and I would just write ops operations for basic code operations. This you don't need to inject because this, I mean, if we could have created an interface, then we could have injected. So I would just do ops equals to new code, right? It is requiring what? Yeah. So this is requiring this. So I should use it, or instead of that I can directly do it over here. Pass. This is not the correct way because this is under domain references, and domain is not going to be used here as per the clean architecture. Okay, I should create interfaces over here and inject those interfaces basically. So I can quickly do that to just show you. I would say create add new item. I would do interface, and I would write let's say what do I say, I basic info. And what I'll do is just to quickly set this up. This particular guy over here, I would go over here and check out what is that method name. So it is perform logic. So I would do void perform logic. That's it, right? And I would use it to my interface, and I would say use this, and it is already implemented over here, and that is already injected over there. So what I need to do is just register it. So first I need to have a reference of application layer. Okay, and then I would just copy this line, or I could do like services, services dot add transcend what is that, my basic info, is implemented at basic info CRUD, right? And that's it, done. What I could do now is instead of this, I would inject I basic info repo, let's say, and here also I would inject repo and say this dot repo. So repo equals repo, and this would be injected, and my public action result, action result insert info. Here you will accept. Now there is a problem that we don't directly, so there has to be some information that needs to be carried out, so you don't pass anything from here. You simply call that method. This would be http post, and here you would say, let's say for example, repo dot perform logic, right? And you do return okay. Okay, so we are not targeting what is this and all. We are implementing like this thing, but whether it is running or not. So I'll just click over here. It is taking me to this place. Basically it is this place, so I can quickly, so this is I'm just doing, but this will come from the user, not from here. So let's say first name equals to abc, info dot last name equals to pqr, info dot gender equals to m, let's say. Okay, and that info we are sending it over here because we have only these information with us. Now we can target our application to run with basic info slash, okay, anyhow we can run this application now, and I would apply this thing over here, a debugger, just to check out whether we are in the right place or not. It will take a little bit, but we can check it out. So as you can see that there are two endpoints here, and it says try it out, so I can try it out and I can execute it. So at the back it will resolve all the dependency, and it came over here. So I would just quickly go to these lines and try to insert the record. Let's see if my connection string is correct. It will give an okay result after writing it onto the database. Yeah, it did, and it executed. So now it's the time to check it out in our database. So I can check with SDB, and I would like select star from basic info table, and I can simply run it, and our record is there. Yeah, so we have checked it out, like how generic implementation is there, and how we have implemented using dependency injection. It is not necessary that you use dependency injection, but you should use it because this is a standard procedures now. It gives an extra hand for you to make the code clean. If you can see, if you analyze this, we are simply like keeping the code as clean as possible because you're simply injecting. No, you're not initializing them. It is all being done by this dependency container. And if you see the way this project is arranged, they all are independently testable because I can test this DB services. right here. Just by creating some tables here itself for this particular layer, I can check this layer independently, I can check this layer independently, I mean test it out, test them out independently, I can test this layer out independently. So this is one of the advantages of using a clean architecture. So the advantages of repository pattern is it centralizes the data logic as we have centralized it in the iRepository interface. And it gives a substitution point for the unit test, means that you can substitute, I mean each unit can be each layer can be can have an independent unit test, and you can substitute the implementation of different classes just by using the repository. You can provide a different class, and you can have in the generic repository, and you can check that test that particular table or the logic. And if you want to change any data logic or business, you don't need to change the repository logic, right? Because that is the main part where all the saving, updating, deleting operation is going on. So it is flexible because you now don't need to change the CRUD part, but you can in the perform logic, I mean the perform logic method, you can change anything you want. You can completely change the implementing class where you can have a different set of rules and things. But since after having all those rules and processes, you will again call a repository operations to perform CRUD. That is why it is providing you a flexible architecture. So takeaway from this demo is we have learned generic repository pattern. We have seen a glimpse of a dependency injection using .NET Core 5 and a glimpse of clean architecture. So that is all for the demo today. Hope you have understood what is being explained. If you have any doubts, you can DM me in LinkedIn. Thank you very much.